meanwhile, we are going to keep trucking right along here to understanding blockchain with the Apple II. Charles Mangin is going to talk to us about that. So Charles, go ahead.
Okay, so what is blockchain? In some ways, this presentation is sort of a logical follow-up to my presentation KansasFest 2020, and all of the talks from last year are still online on YouTube. So you may want to watch my presentation from last year and be all caught up. I will wait. So last year, I thought I had peaked in my ongoing quest to find the least practical thing I could do with an Apple II, and that was in mining Bitcoin. This year, I may have actually topped that. I will present today a working blockchain platform built and running on an Apple II. Or I was planning to. It's not complete yet, and it will still require some modern conveniences like internet-connected cloud storage. But I've set myself a challenge, and myself has accepted it. Speaking of which, the challenges. Challenge number 1, I will attempt to explain the concept of blockchain without mentioning Bitcoin, or at least not mentioning it again, as much as I already have. Challenge number 2, I need to implement a working blockchain for the 8-bit Apple II. And because the best way I found to understand something and the way that it works is to try and build one for myself. So this is a work in progress, but seriously, what is a blockchain? A blockchain is a database. You can think of it that way, and not even that, it's more like a receipt. It's a big, dumb text file. It's a ledger, well. Each item, okay, are you guys seeing my slides? Yeah, okay. I keep seeing stuff pop up in the chat. Anyhow, so it's a ledger. And each item in the ledger, just like a regular ledger, is a transaction. It doesn't have to be a financial transaction. It could be inventory, TPS reports, anything that requires documentation. The transaction is just a record of something happened on a particular date. The blockchain ledger itself is really no more complicated than a text file. So it's really just a series of blocks of text. And they're all sort of in a series, kind of like a chain. So it's a chain of blocks. So thank you and good night. Yeah, so what is it about blockchain, the concept of it, that makes it so special, that makes it so mind-bogglingly desirable that for a while, any company that mentioned blockchain in its prospectus would get investors trampling one another to throw money at it. So this is the important part. The blockchain concept provides a verifiable, tamper-proof record for transactions stored in the ledger. The transactions in the chain, the record of events from a certain date, are nigh impossible to change or delete without modifying every block in the chain. And what in the name of KansasFest has any of this to do with the Apple II? So I'm sure plenty of you can think of some uses for distributed tamper-proof store of data. Any kind of legal agreement you might have, receipts from buying or selling rare hardware, inventory of your collection. You can hold on to your serial numbers in case things get lost or stolen. Source code for your original ideas against future copyright claims. How about video game high scores? Sound good? Let's go with that. It's a small amount of data, low stakes, it's perfect. So what would it take to implement a blockchain that you can use on the Apple II? So blockchain requires a few things. Requirement number 1 is distributed storage. And while that may be difficult on an Apple II, the ledger needs to be in multiple places and distributed for it to be protected. and immune to being deleted by a malicious hacker or a system admin that makes a typo. Anyone who wants to store transactions in the chain gets their own copy. So if it's properly peer-to-peer, there's no single point of failure. And I could easily digress into how the peer network maintains consensus about what's in the chain and what keeps it updated. But I've got limited time and you've got limited patience. So in order to participate in the Apple II blockchain and submit your high scores, you will run a client program on your modern internet-connected computer. This is still a work in progress, but it's just a web page right now. So any web browser will do. You can probably even do it on your phone. You'll use that to periodically check in with the A2BC or Apple II blockchain network, which initially is just a web server right now. And with that, you'll update your local copy of the blockchain when a new block has been added. So we have, or will have, distributed storage for the blocks. What else do we need to make it into a proper blockchain? Well, we need a hashing algorithm, but why? So to make the chain, here's our smiley face, happy chain of all the blocks. To make it tamper-proof, the smallest chain anywhere in the ledger would invalidate the entire chain. So how does that work? We need hash. Last year, I talked a bit about hashing as a process using SHA, or the secure hashing algorithm. And here's a refresher in general terms. So hash is like a digital fingerprint, a unique identifier for some larger piece of data. The hash is a small predefined size. The original data could be anything, could be any, small or large, anything really, as long as it's a digital object. The hashing algorithm is the process used to create the fingerprint. So if you're familiar with making a checksum, those are very much like a pared down hash. If I have a file and I make you a copy of it, but the two checksums don't match, then you know that one of them has been tampered with or corrupted somehow. Importantly, it's a one-way. You can't get the original back no matter how much you processed the hash. In SHA-2, which was part of the presentation, the thing that I did the presentation about last year, the format is a 256-bit long hash. So that means there's 202 to the power of 256 possible hashes. And that's a number that starts with a 1, has about 78 digits, and is within an order of magnitude the estimated number of protons in the observable universe, which means ideally no two original files would ever create the same hash, or what's called a collision. So to make a blockchain verifiable, each block is run through an algorithm to create a hash, a fingerprint for the block. Then that block's hash is recorded in the next block as it's created. So now the hash of block 1 is a part of block 2. And then the hash of block 2 is part of block 3, and so on. So any change to a block would alter its hash. And so it's possible to verify the integrity of the entire chain by the same process we used to create it. So hash block number 1, compare the results of the original hash stored in block 2. If it matches, then you verify the rest of block 2 and compare that to the hash in block 3, and so on. So if you ever wanted to sneak a change into the chain, you'd have to modify every subsequent block all the way down the line, which is nigh impossible without being noticed, and even more so if the chain exists in multiple places. You'd have to change every copy of all of those blocks at once in all of those different places. So this is the secret sauce that makes a shared ledger into buzzword compliant investment opportunity. Hash, or rather, this is the secret sauce. So I'm introducing a hashing algorithm I call SG32. SG is short for salmagundi, which is a kind of hash, literally, a salad made of chopped meat, fish, and vegetables, which has evolved into a condiment called Solomon Gundi. but I digress. And 32, because it's the end result, is a 32-byte hash, which coincidentally is the same as SHA-2. And if it's good enough for the 90s era NSA, it's good enough for me. So the code to implement SG32 hashing in your own programs is live on GitHub right now at this address, and you can scan that QR code. Please note, and I shouldn't have to warn you, but don't use this for anything like mission critical or like for real encryption. If you're going to try and like rob the Fort Knox or something, and you're trying to encrypt, then just try your best. Use something real, like that's been tested, like SHA or whatever. I initially put a bunch of iterations and stuff and bit rotations and shuffling on top of each other. But I ripped all those extra steps out for version 1, called it good enough, which is to say I've done as much as I can to break it, test for collisions and whatnot. And so after this morning's talk about entropy, I decided to run a 500,000 bytes worth of hashes through the entropy tests that the other presenter mentioned. And if you know what these numbers mean, please let me know. I'm not a cryptography expert by any stretch of the imagination. So incidentally, getting the code for generating these QR codes on your Apple II working properly is part of the reason the rest of the Apple II blockchain is still a work in progress. These things involve really hard math. But that code is also available at GitHub. So here is the secret recipe of SG32. Seed, a segment, and a squish. So we will start with a seed, as every good hash must have. We generate the seed from these bytes in the AppleSoft ROM space, which are a handy a set of polynomial constants. And they start at address F0CF. There are 10 of them. They're 5 bytes each. I use the first 8. Each one begins with just about the same bits. So skipping the first byte of each one of those. So the seed begins with the remaining 4 bytes of the first 8 constants, or 32 bytes. With each of those 32 bytes, I rotated the bits to the left once, appended the results, and continued until I filled up 256 bytes of RAM. So that's predefined, and that's part of the specification, if you will, and just gets loaded into memory as part of the program when you are running the hash. So step 2 is segment. So we're going to break our source message, source file, whatever it is, into chunks of 255 bytes. So note, not 256, 255. And if the data in the hash is too short, or the last chunk doesn't conveniently end up on a byte barrier of byte 255, we pad it out with bytes from the seed block, beginning with the first byte of the seed to fill in until we get to 255. So next, with our chunks, we XOR each of the bytes, exclusive or actually it's an EOR if you want to use the assembly mnemonic, but it's an exclusive OR either way. Each byte with the corresponding byte of the seed, and then store it in a new block, which is called Scratch. That overwrites anything that was there before, but it should be all zeroed out in the initialization process. Along the way, we XOR each byte with a running checksum, and at the end, that checksum becomes the Scratch byte 256. So for each of the subsequent chunks, if you have longer files than one page worth of memory, we repeat the process, XORing the bytes with those in the Scratch left from the previous step. So the result is 256 bytes of Scratch block that is a essentially a combination of all the chunks of the original message. Every byte has been affected by some byte of the original message, and every byte of the original message has influenced the resulting scratch. So now to squish it and do 32 bytes of the final hash. So what makes SG32 particularly suited to the Apple II is, well, all up to this point, it's just been boring binary math. You can do that by hand if you want, slowly. But the special sauce is AppleSoft Basic and floating point math. So we start with the last 4 bytes of the scratch block, populate the lower 4 bytes of AppleSoft's floating point accumulator. That's at address 9E. Byte 0 at 9D, we go ahead and stick that and keep that as 81 so that the next step won't cause an overflow error when we multiply it by phi, or the golden ratio, which is 1.61803, yada, 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 yada. So why the golden ratio? It's a nice, crunchy, complex number, and it's played a part in some of the early things that I was working on as hashing experiments. So it just kind of stuck around. So to multiply the populated accumulator with the golden ratio in the argument bytes, what we do is we populate those 2 blocks of bytes, and then we jump to the floating point multiplication routine in ROM at E982. Bytes 1 through 4 of the result, because the end, that first byte of the accumulator is usually either a 7 something or an 8 something because of the range and the way it does exponents for floating point. We'll drop that. We use the remaining 4 bytes, and those get XORed with the hash at byte 32, which was initialized to 0. So we shift by 1 byte and repeat. And then that generates byte 31, and so on, until you've generated 32 bytes of the hash. Are we there yet? No. Got to keep going, because we need to go until all 256 bytes of the scratch block have been processed. Because we populated things 4 bytes at a time, the last byte generated is actually byte 5 of the hash, but it also means that all 256 bytes of the scratch have been processed to contribute to the resulting 32 byte hash. So that's it. That is SG32, the hash function we'll be using in the Apple II blockchain. Oh, remember the blockchain? Yeah, so what's in it for me? Why buy into the scheme and donate space on your hard drive or whatever for the privilege of occasionally using it to store something, especially if it's just for video game bragging rights? So the third piece of the puzzle of this whole Rube Goldberg contraption is giving people an incentive to play along and thus maintain the chain. So up to now, I've done my best to avoid the term ipto cray urc, which is the original incentive offered by Satoshi Nakamoto in his blockchain white paper. And this is where people start arguing about whether crypto is a revolution or a scam or a waste of resources or all of the above. Feelings start getting hurt, blood pressures rise. And that is a much longer conversation. I'm not going to have time for it in this presentation. I barely have time for what I've got left. I really don't have time for it ever, to be honest, because you're welcome to take the discussion to Reddit or Discord or wherever, but leave me out of it. To me, cryptocurrency is a big flashy distraction that draws attention and resources away from more practical uses for the blockchain concept. So while crypto has no inherent value, it does have perceived value, which is incentive enough for people to spend gigabucks on mining rigs and stripping the market for GPU cards and driving prices up and whatnot. So for the A2 blockchain, I give you 8 Bitcoin. That name's already taken. 8 bits is a byte, so Bytecoin. That name also taken. How about Waz coin? Oddly, also taken. Coins imply money, and I'm intentionally trying not to make this about currency. So how about video game tokens? No cash value. You put them into an arcade machine, you get back for all that effort is your bragging rights if you get the high score. So great. New token, name to be determined. So how do you earn yourself some of these tokens to be named later? You sign up and agree to do two things. One, you grab and maintain a copy of the A2 blockchain using the web client that I talked about earlier that is coming soon. And then step two, you validate new transactions in the chain. So this is the work part of the proof of work that I have as yet neglected to mention. When there's a new transaction posted on the chain, you'll be prompted to download a disk image. And then you'll then have to perform the proof of work to validate the new transaction and add a block to the chain, earning yourself a shiny TBD. To mint the token, you have to boot the disk image on a real Apple II. Shouldn't matter if it's on a real floppy, spinning floppy, a CFFA, or some other solid state media. But the idea is you do the hashing on a real Apple II. That's the work part. There's a few little nuggets in there that should hopefully invalidate your work if it looks like you're running it in emulation. Obviously, the detection is not perfect because nothing is. It's not really a solvable thing. But if it's clear you're mining or minting tokens faster than the laws of physics allow for a 1 megahertz 6502, you'll get the ban hammer. So same with accelerators and all kinds of other trickery. Just be cool. It's all about fun. It's about the giggles. Nobody's actually put any money into this yet. So I have a demo, and I'm going to try and share that very quickly here. All right, so first thing that the program does, assuming it's booting up, is hashes itself. It loads itself into memory and then hashes itself and generates a hash that we can then use to compare which version of the client you ran your proof against. So, and then it'll be loading from the disk. There we go. So it hashes itself, and then it comes along and hashes the transaction block that came on the disk with various nonce values that are appended to the end. The starting value gets randomized based on how long it takes you to press any key, yay for entropy. That advances from there based on the resulting hashes. So that's a fairly random progression. And that way it's not linear. So multiple validators can be working on the same transaction. You're no more likely to succeed than anyone else, just for starting first. And it also means you can stop and start again without losing any actual progress because it's all sort of random chance. So success in solving and validating a block is defined as a resulting hash that contains a number of 0 bytes equal to or greater than the current difficulty setting, which is a whole nother thing with the difficulty setting being automatically up and down based on how often new transactions come in. So if a let me go back here to my screen. There we go. It's all about weird math and stuff, but the idea is that it has to increase in difficulty to stay fair, and it'll all be maintained by the chain itself, really. So anyhow, if you are the lucky winner, your Apple II will display another handy QR code for you to scan. That'll open up a URL that'll tell the server to add your minted block to the chain, and record your new token balance as the next transaction. All the other clients should get updated shortly thereafter, and the process begins again. So the URL that you get will be a hashed string specific to your unique ID, which will be embedded on the floppy disk image you downloaded earlier. Thank you, Cadius, for being able to manipulate disk images from Linux. That's awesome. So anyhow, that is embedded on the disk image you download. So don't copy that floppy, or do if you want to pool resources, for instance. And to get your unique ID, sign up for the beta by sending an email to this address, a2bc@option8.com, with a photo of the serial number of a real Apple II that you are planning to mine with. So don't just grab one off the internet. And when you, your unique ID will be generated from that serial number. So when you log in to validate, submit transactions, you get credit. It doesn't go to somebody else. You don't have to sign in with a password and all that kind of stuff. You're welcome to run the client on multiple real machines, but you only need one to create the ID and reserve your spot in the beta. So I think I have a couple of minutes left for questions, and go.
All right, let me scroll back up here.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was talking fast because I had a lot of slides.
No. I'm just. Will Dave and Buster's accept this?
Remember, no monetary value. Only a perceived value if you want to create a perceived value, a market for exchanging them or something like that. I will allow that to happen, but I'm not intending it to happen.
Grab entropy from the drive. See?
I could. The amount that we're the starting value is based on how long it takes you to press enter. It's enough entropy to create that first like 5 bytes of the nonce. So it's not not having to do NSA level bits of randomness.
So right now you need to log into a central website. Any plans to distribute that part of it?
Yes. When it starts up, it'll be one web server running a web service that you scan your QR code, and it will send that to that web server. Eventually, the hope is that will be just one of many, and you can host your own if you want. So you will just scan that code, and then it'll go to your local host that's running a web service or whatever, or you can choose which one you want to go to. But they'll all the idea is that they will all collaborate and update the chain peer to peer.
Any plans for Ethernet support?
If somebody wants to hack that together, that's great. I don't have a working Ethernet, so we'll work on that.
Okay, well, that was really interesting and informative. So thank you so much, Charles, for your presentation.
And to answer Ken's very important question, that was not Val Kilmer, that was Heath Ledger.
Womp womp.
Yeah, womp womp. Anyhow, so appreciate your time. Thank you, and I'm out.